If you've ever tried to fetch Solana transfers across token programs, accounts, and slots, you know how painful that can be. Today I'm going to show you how to get all Solana transfers in just a few lines of code using Pinax's Token API, and then we're going to take those, plug them into a fish tank, and get some swimmers. I've built this HydroScan app which will show transfers swimming across the screen as different sized fish. Tiny transfers are shrimps, massive transfers are whales. I've been using dummy data so far, and now it's time to integrate real transfers into the app. Here's the structure that the fish expect. We can ignore all of these properties down here, they're purely for display purposes, and we're going to focus on these at the top. We need an ID for deduplication purposes because some transactions have multiple transfers. We need the transaction ID so that we can use that for display. We need the from and the to for the same purpose. And then we of course need the value so that we can know what type of fish to have swim across the fish tank. We don't need a symbol because it's not really going to be displayed anywhere, and the user will already know what symbol it is because they can select one of the two tokens here at the top. If you want to clone the repository, head over to the description and grab the link, and then move over to the Solana branch, and that'll be empty for you to start hacking away with me on. If you're not doing this from this repository, you're going to want to go over an npm I Pinax Token API. This will give you the SDK that has a bunch of helper methods and also a client constructor. If you are working along with me though, this is already here in the dependencies. The next step that you're going to want to do is copy over the .env.example into .env. Then you're going to want to head over to TheGraph.Market, sign up for an account, and grab the API token authentication JWT. Pop that bad boy over here, and you're off to the races. Now you have to keep in mind that these are secret keys. They're not meant to be public keys and they're not meant to be exposed, so you can't just put that into your client code because that will expose that key to the entire world. Instead, what you have to do is create a backend route which you can fetch data from. You might be using Express or Fastify or whatever it might be, but in our case, we're going to be using Next.js to create a server route. In this application, I've put this here inside of app, API, transfers, and then route. Inside of this file, I've set up some scaffolding for you, including a post handler and just some general responses so that you can build this without worrying about having to set up all of the plumbing. We're going to need the contract so that we can differentiate between fetching native SOL transfers and a contract transfer, which in Solana's case will be a mint. And then we need the last block so that we don't continuously fetch the same transfers over and over again. Next, we're going to import the SVM chains enum and the token API constructor from Pinax Token API. We're then going to construct the token API into a client using the API token that you specified in your environment variable. To get transfers, we're going to call the getTransfers method on client.svm.tokens. We're going to pass in Solana as the network. The maximum limit for a free count is 10, so we're going to use that. The start block will be our last block, which can also be undefined. The mint will be the contract, or if the contract isn't specified, we're going to use the virtual SPL for SOL. The reasoning here is that if you don't specify a contract, you will get all transfers across all known tokens on the API. And then we're just going to put page 1 in here. I will also just then this out to pull out the data because we don't really need anything else for this. Let's test this by console logging out the result. If you're not already running the project, go ahead and do npm I and npm run dev. I'm going to use bun, so we're just going to do bun dev. And then I'm just going to curl with post to localhost 3000 API transfers, and I'm going to feed it in an empty JSON as my post data. If you go back to where you're running the server, you should see that this logged out a bunch of different transfers, which are all native SOL because we didn't specify a contract. Just to make sure that this works with another token program, I'm going to manually feed in the USDC contract here, and then we'll run that again. And now we see that the symbol is USDC. Okay, so going back to our interface, we need to reformat the result into what is expected here. So now I'm just going to iterate over the result, put it into this transfers constant, and then reformat it into ID, transaction ID, from, to, and value. Now, because this is a TypeScript SDK, if you click dot on anything, you should get in your IDE's autocomplete just a list of the available properties. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just lay them out here for you. There's the signature, which is the transaction ID. We have the source, which will be the from, the destination, which will be to, and then the value, which will coincidentally be value. For this ID, I'm just going to use math.random. These could conflict, but I guess for the sake of the tutorial, it's fine. If you really wanted to make this better, you could use crypto and generate a UUID, but I think this is good enough for now. Now we also need the last block, so I'm going to go ahead and make this transfer into returning as part of the result. And for the last block, we're going to take the last transfer and grab its block ID. So in the case where we have results, we're going to use the last result and take its block num. In the case that we don't, we're just going to feed back the last block number that was given from the request. Let's go ahead and run our curl command again, except now I'm going to pipe it into JQ so that we can get some pretty printing. And there we go. We have our perfectly formatted results. I do notice that this is a number and not a string, even though our interface says string. So we're just going to change this to number. I did also notice that our try catch block isn't encapsulating our code, so we're just going to fix that right now. That way we get easy error handling because we're not actually catching on this request. So we did all that work and we still don't have fish. We need to go back to our client code and start integrating that into the front end. Open the page.tsx file inside of the app directory. Inside here, you're going to find a fetch transfers function. And we're not going to talk too much about what use callback is or use state or any of this other stuff is. This isn't really a React tutorial, and there are plenty of excellent tutorials out there for that. But the basics is that use callback makes this a little more performant, and use state is a way for us to store reactive variables so that when we change them, our front end updates. Now the rest of this tutorial is pretty much standard JavaScript code. We're going to use the built-in fetch to get data from the API transfers route. We're going to send it some post data. We're going to send and expect JSON. And then our payload is going to be the contract and the last block. These will be changed automatically when you select the different token and when we feed back in the block from fetching the API route. We're then going to pull out the JSON from the response, and just in case there is some kind of issue, we're just going to return null. In the case that we don't have a result or we don't have any transfers, we're just going to fail out early because there's nothing for us to do. Next, we're going to use set transfers so that we can update the reactive state. We're going to take the previous array and concatenate the new transfers on top of it because we don't want to have a situation where the old transfers disappear as we overwrite them. And then finally, we're going to set the last block to what we got from the result. Let's take a look over at our aquarium and see if we got some fish swimming. Da-da-da! So we should have USDT flowing across the screen right now. If we go over to the menu and click the native token, which will be SOL, and then click Go Fish, it should make all the fish disappear, and then new fish will come in. It should also change the scales here because SOL is a little bit of a different scale. We can see that it updated the scales, and now we have a different set of fish coming in, and these would all be SOL transfers. You can hover over these fish and see the transaction ID, the from, the to, and the amount. Now you may have noticed that there aren't many fish here. This is because we have a limit of 10 and we're only fetching the first page. We're going to stop here, but you should see if you can wrap that in a loop and pull out more pages to get more fish on the screen. If you get stuck or want to show off what you're building, jump into the Discord linked in the description. We help devs build production-ready apps pretty much every day, and we also run success stories on a lot of the people that are in those chats, so there's a big benefit to you joining. There's lots more to the token API, like getting token metadata, holders, balances, owner lookups, price data, and even swap events. Head over to the documentation link in the description for a full list of endpoints you can use with the SDK across a variety of blockchains. Thanks for fishing with me, and I'll see you next time.